I was in medical school. It has turned out to be important for everything from whether you're going to get Alzheimer's or Parkinson's to what your mood is, whether you're going to get depression, to how you think and act. It's remarkable the effect of your microbiome on you, and even the way you respond to various pathogens, if you're going to get a cold or not, if you're going to get the measles or not. These things are all related to your microbiome's effect on your immune system. So it's remarkable. And yes, absolutely, as you said, you want to make sure to get your probiotics. This is why people eat fermented foods, for example. And as you said, whether you take it as a supplement or eat it as food, you want to get your microbiome to be optimal. And in fact, there are differences in the microbiomes between people with Alzheimer's and people with normal cognition. And interestingly, when you look at mice that model Alzheimer's disease, if you fix that microbiome, guess what? Their disease improves. So in fact, there are fundamental relationships between your microbiome and your brain function.
So the microbiome, that is the good bacteria in our gut?
The microbiome is all of the species. So you actually have about 1,000 different species. And in your gut, you've got both aerobic bacteria, you've got anaerobic bacteria, and they outnumber the aerobics by about 1,000 to 1 or so. But then you've also got things, you've got various fungi, you've got things called archaea, you've got viruses in there, you've got phage in there, so you've got all these different things. What we think of as a single human, we call ourselves I or me. That's actually a misunderstanding. We are systems that have over 1,000 different species to what you call I.
Very good. We can use the royal we now.
You absolutely can and should. You're speaking for your microbiome as well. And by the way, the microbiome is both the good guys and the bad guys. And having the bad ones puts you at risk for all sorts of diseases. And you can mess up your microbiome royally by doing things like drinking diet sodas, drinking too much alcohol, being under too much stress, having a bad relationship. These things all affect your microbiome.
So the simpler parts here are not eating, simpler to say, shall we say, not having your processed foods, eating basically your whole foods and your low glycemic fruits, and as you say, the protein is not overdoing the diet, and what we call healthy fats for the ketosis, your avocados and olive oil, that sort of thing. And minimal of the high carb. Well, what do you think about potatoes and rice?
Yeah, the good news is there are workarounds for all these things. For potatoes, sweet potatoes are good. And then the other thing you can do is, the colored potatoes. So purple potatoes, red potatoes, the ones that, not red on the outside, red on the inside. So when you actually look at the potato, it's not white. You actually have a lower glycemic index with those. So, you can use those. With rice, you've got to be a little careful. Now, the good news is it is not as hard on your gut as things with gluten. So it's actually a good grain, as my wife, who's a family practitioner, points out. It's a good grain overall. However, you want to minimize grains. You want to minimize dairy. You want to minimize the simple carbohydrates. Those are the big three. And as far as rice, there's one argument that says if you're going to have it, have brown rice because it's lower glycemic. That's true. On the other hand, as Dr. Stephen Gundry points out, that also has more lectins in it. So if you're someone who's got autoimmune disease, you want to be careful about the lectins, and then you probably want to go with white rice instead of the brown rice. But, eat that's one of the ones to eat sparingly. The main things you want to be focused on are things like, as you said, whole foods, the colorful vegetables, leafy greens, good fats. You want to have, most of your diet in terms of calories be good fats, protein, a moderate amount, about 1 gram per kilogram of your mass. So most people are going to be eating something like 50 to 70 grams of protein per day. And then the rest is going to be the complex carbohydrates. You can also do, as you know, resistant starches. So, if you want to eat rice, what you can actually do is heat it up and then let it cool, and it becomes a resistant starch now that is actually much better for you than the stuff that's the non-resistant, so that it won't be broken down. It'll actually get to your microbiome.
My word. Eat cold rice?
You can heat it minimally after that. But what you do is there are ways to produce these resistant starches, and you basically are heating them up and then chilling them. And essentially, it's almost like letting them gel. They literally change their structure so that they become resistant to digestion.
Oh, my word. I have never heard of this resistant starch.
Yes.
And you have this in your book as well.
Absolutely, yes.
I am so impressed. This is amazing. Who would have thought that brown rice isn't necessarily better for you? So workarounds, yes, and I want you to know, Dr. Bredesen, and everyone, my listeners, that I have not had sugar for almost 2 years now, or grains, or any processed foods, and people have asked me if I've gotten a facelift.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Yeah,
it's
so important.
It's amazing, and I feel so energetic and younger. It's quite amazing. They call sugar the new smoking.
That's exactly right. And certainly when I grew up, of course, that wasn't known. And the big issue back then when I was a little kid was all about smoking. But that has changed dramatically. And as you indicated, sugar is the new smoking, as you know, sitting is also the new smoking.
Right.
So in fact, this is another thing where just sitting all the time, being sedentary, is turning out to be quite negative for your health.
Yes. So as a psychotherapist, I sit for a whole hour and then I get up. And just to make a point for everyone, if you have a sedentary job, to get up at least every hour and move around for a few minutes as much as you can.
Mm-hmm.
That's a wonderful thing. And I just want to go back to that ApoE4. Did I get that right? Yes,
ApoE4. So what happens is this is called apolipoprotein E. So this is a fat. This is literally a protein that carries fat. And so interestingly, we thought of this as your butcher. It's the guy who carries the fat. And this is a molecule that we all have, the gene for it that makes the protein. And, of course, you have one copy from your mother and one copy from your father. So it comes in 3 flavors or alleles, ApoE2, 3, and 4. So, for example, I checked myself, and I'm a 3-3. That means I got ApoE3 from my mother and ApoE3 from my father. And that's the most common one. It's kind of the vanilla. And so that is the one, as I mentioned earlier, that means I have about a 9% risk during my lifetime. But some people get one copy of ApoE4. ApoE4 is the one that's associated with Alzheimer's disease. And if you have 2 copies, then it's highly associated with Alzheimer's disease. And they're actually different shapes. The 3 looks more like a nutcracker, like an upside-down V. And on the other hand, the ApoE4, the one that's associated with Alzheimer's disease, looks more like columns. So, in fact, the nutcracker is pulled together. So quite a different shape. Now, what we found and published a few years ago is the surprise is that this thing that we called our butcher that was carrying around the fat also actually enters the nucleus of your cell, and it actually binds to 1,700 different genes and alters the production of the proteins from those, the RNA and therefore the protein. And so what we called your butcher is also, guess what, your senator. It's actually making the laws of the land and determining whether your cell is going to be more pro-inflammatory, is going to be more responsive. So as you can imagine, being in a pro-inflammatory state for years does indeed put you at increased risk for Alzheimer's disease. Now, it's a positive thing when you are young and you might be fighting infections and fighting inflammation. You actually have an advantage if you're ApoE4. And by the way, that was the original gene for hominids. So for 96% of our evolution, we've all been ApoE4. It's just been in the last 220,000 years that ApoE3 appeared, and then just in the last 80,000 years, ApoE2 appeared. And so these things, you want to know where your status is. And by the way, people used to say, hey, you don't want to know because there's nothing you can do about it. Well, that's wrong. There's a tremendous amount you can do about it. In fact, there's a wonderful website that was started by a woman named Julie G., who herself is an ApoE44, and by the way, went on program and is doing very, very well, improved her cognition from the 35th percentile to the 98th percentile, addressing these various risk factors. And she's got a wonderful website that has over 3,000 people who are all ApoE4 positive, and they share information and share best practices to decrease the likelihood of developing Alzheimer's.
And that's Julie G. G as in Guy?
Well, I say G because these people are all anonymous because they are online talking about their own genetic status. And it was interesting, they came to the Buck Institute where I was the founding president a number of years ago, and they had not met each other. They're all online, of course. And so, as I mentioned in the book, they're sitting there, they're talking to each other and telling these remarkable stories of being told there's no hope, et cetera. And, of course, they all had their online handles. And they'd say, I'm lost at sea. And everybody would say, oh, you're lost at sea. Oh, and and then the other one would say, I'm this person or that person. They say, oh, you're high sea. So it's hilarious to see all the people meeting each other and for the first time and sharing their stories that were just remarkable.
Oh, well, Dr. Bredesen, I cannot thank you enough. This has been so useful. I hope that my listeners become so well and healthy, and you are clearly on a mission, Dr. Bredesen. Thank you so much. And thanks.
We can all.
Oh yeah.
We should all reduce the global burden of dementia together. Thank you, Dr.
Yes.
Duffy.
Oh, you're so welcome. And this is Dr. Duffy Spencer saying goodbye for now and wishing you great relationships.